Backpacking can be an incredible adventure, but it can also turn deadly. In this video, we're exploring 5 of the worst deaths in the history of backpacking. These are real stories with solid proof, showing just how dangerous the wilderness can be. We'll take you through the chilling details of each tragedy, so stay tuned as we uncover what went wrong and how these journeys turned into nightmares. It was July 30, 1998, when Reverend Mike Turner, a 48-year-old pastor from Caldwell, Idaho, set out on a solo spiritual journey in Wyoming's wilderness. Known for his deep faith and towering 6'6" height, Mike sought comfort in nature, believing it was his way of connecting with God. He planned a 10-day hike across the Continental Divide, accompanied only by his loyal black Labrador mix, Andy. Afterward, he was supposed to reunite with his family for a camping trip, following a 3-month break from his work. But Mike never made it to that reunion. His journey turned into a battle for survival that would push him to the limits of his faith and endurance. Mike and Andy began their trek on a positive note, heading toward Eckland Lake in the Bridger-Teton National Forest. Mike described the scene in his journal as so quiet, so perfect, reflecting the peace he sought. However, things took a tragic turn on August 2nd, the 4th day of their journey. While navigating a boulder field near a mountain lake over 11,000 feet high and 16 miles from the nearest trailhead, Mike noticed Andy struggling. The dog's paws were raw from the jagged ice, and he was in pain. Concerned for Andy, Mike decided to take a longer, less direct route to ease the strain on his companion. This decision would lead to disaster. As Mike carefully moved through the boulder field, he stepped on a large rock that wobbled under his weight. In an attempt to regain his balance, he jumped to another boulder, but lost his footing and slipped between 2 massive rocks. The boulder he had stepped on rolled over, trapping his legs. Although it didn't crush him, he was completely immobilized. No matter how hard he tried, Mike couldn't free himself. For 2 hours, Mike struggled to escape, using everything he had on hand, but nothing worked. Alone in the wilderness, with no way to call for help, Mike began documenting his ordeal in his journal. At first, he remained hopeful, melting snow for water and using his tent's rainfly to collect dew and rain. Despite his dire situation, he kept his sense of humor, writing, "I wonder how urine will taste with crystal light." As days passed, Mike's hope faded. His journal entries grew more desperate as he feared losing his legs, running out of water, and succumbing to hypothermia. The temperature swings were brutal, with daytime highs in the 90s and nighttime lows in the 30s. Mike's body and spirit weakened as he struggled to survive. By August 5th, 4 days after becoming trapped, Mike's despair was evident. He wrote, "I feel so foolish taking this longer pass, so lonely, more than I imagined. Who would have guessed that 4 days would have gone by and no one has come this way?" Meanwhile, Mike's wife, Diane, grew increasingly worried when he didn't show up as planned. She contacted authorities, and a search began. However, because no one knew Mike had changed his route, searchers were looking in the wrong place. The vast wilderness of Wyoming's Wind River Range made the search even more challenging. Weeks passed with no sign of Mike, and the search was eventually called off. But on August 28th, nearly a month after Mike set out, a break came when Andy, the faithful Labrador, was found alive by hikers miles from where the search had been focused. This discovery reignited the search in the correct area, but it was too late. A hiker named Jeff Stewart eventually found Mike near an unnamed lake. Mike had died of exposure, hypothermia, and dehydration, likely around August 11th, 9 days after his tragic fall. His body was still trapped between the rocks. Beside him, searchers found his journal, protected in a plastic bag, with weak and shaky final entries. In his last moments, Mike had accepted his fate, writing, "I am ready to die, though missing my family. I will trust in God, though he will slay me, yet will I trust in him." Nearby, searchers also found Mike's wedding ring, placed carefully on a rock, a final gesture of love for his family. Mike's tragic death underscores the unpredictability of the wilderness, even for experienced hikers. His story raises haunting questions. What if he hadn't changed his route? What if someone had found him sooner? But in the end, Mike found a sense of peace, sustained by his faith and love for his family, even in the face of unimaginable suffering. It was July 14th, 2001, in Australia's Northern Territory. Peter Falconio, a 28-year-old British backpacker, was exploring the outback with his girlfriend, Joanne Lees. The couple had been on a thrilling adventure, traveling in their orange Volkswagen Kombi van, enjoying the freedom and beauty of Australia's rugged landscapes. But what was supposed to be a memorable trip turned into a nightmare that would forever haunt Falconio's family, the authorities, and the public. Peter Falconio was described as adventurous. Alongside Joanne Lees, he had been exploring the wild terrains of Australia for months. They were no strangers to the challenges of traveling through remote areas, but nothing could have prepared them for the horror that awaited them that night. As they drove along the isolated Stewart Highway, a vehicle approached them from behind. The driver, later identified as Bradley John Murdoch, a known drug runner, signaled for them to pull over, claiming there were sparks coming from their van. Falconio, thinking it was a mechanical issue, stopped to check, but it was a trap. Murdoch had planned something far more sinister. When Falconio stepped out of the van, Murdoch shot him. While Falconio's body was never found, it's believed he was killed instantly. Inside the van, Joanne Lee suddenly found herself in a fight for her life. Murdoch, who had just killed her boyfriend, turned his attention to her. Lees tried to escape, but Murdoch quickly restrained her with cable ties and forced her into his vehicle. However, Lees managed to free herself when Murdoch was distracted, likely dealing with Falconio's body. Seizing the opportunity, she ran into the darkness of the outback, disappearing into the thin scrub. For hours, Lees hid, terrified that Murdoch would find her. Murdoch searched for her, but eventually gave up and drove away, taking Falconio's body with him. The location where Murdoch disposed of Falconio's body remains a mystery to this day. Lees eventually flagged down a passing truck driver, who took her to a nearby roadhouse in Barrow Creek, where the police were contacted. By the time authorities arrived, Murdoch was long gone, leaving behind only a small amount of blood, later confirmed to be Falconio's. Despite extensive searches, Falconio's body was never found, and the case remained unsolved for 4 years. In 2005, a breakthrough finally came. Advances in forensic science led to the identification of Bradley Murdoch as the prime suspect. DNA evidence found on Lees's t-shirt matched Murdoch's, directly linking him to the crime. Murdoch, who had a history of violence and drug trafficking, was arrested and charged with Falconio's murder and Lees's abduction. The trial was highly publicized, with Joanne Lees testifying about the terrifying events and her miraculous escape. Despite Murdoch's claims of innocence, the evidence was overwhelming, leading to his conviction. In December 2005, Murdoch was sentenced to life imprisonment with a non-parole period of 28 years. Yet, even with Murdoch behind bars, the case was far from over. The location of Peter Falconio's body remains unknown, a fact that continues to torment his family. Over the years, various searches and potential leads have ended in disappointment, and despite advances in forensic science, Falconio's remains have never been found. Joanne Lees, who survived this horrifying ordeal, has tried to move on, but the events of that night continue to shadow her life. She returned to the outback in an emotional attempt to find Falconio's body, but her search was unsuccessful. Lees maintains a close relationship with Falconio's family, and together they continue to grieve the loss of Peter, whose final resting place remains a mystery. It was August 23, 2016, in Home Hill, Queensland, Australia. Mia Alif Chung, a 21-year-old from Derbyshire, and Thomas Jackson, a 30-year-old from Cheshire, were among the backpackers staying at Shelley's Backpackers Hostel. Mia, full of life and eager to see the world before settling down, had quickly become popular among the other travelers. Thomas, a seasoned traveler with a compassionate heart, had spent years exploring different countries, teaching English and helping others along the way. That night, the hostel was unusually quiet, as everyone wound down after a long day of farm work. But the peace would soon be shattered by a horrifying act of violence. Smail Ayad, a 29-year-old French backpacker, was in a state of psychosis, allegedly influenced by cannabis. His mind was distorted, and what happened next would leave everyone in shock. Around 11:15 p.m., Ayad launched a brutal knife attack on Mia. The attack was sudden and vicious, leaving Mia with multiple stab wounds. Despite the terror and pain, Mia managed to escape and lock herself in a bathroom, but the damage was already done. Another backpacker, Daniel Richards, found Mia in the bathroom, bloodied and terrified. Without hesitation, he raised the alarm, his shouts being heard all over the place. Hearing the commotion, Thomas Jackson rushed to the scene, unaware of the danger that awaited him. Thomas found Mia and quickly realized how serious the situation was. Despite the clear danger, he chose to stay with her, trying to comfort and protect her. His bravery would soon cost him his life. Ayad, who had earlier jumped from a balcony in a bizarre attempt to fly, re-entered the hostel, still armed with the knife. He was shouting and gesturing erratically. Unaware of Ayad's violent intent, Thomas initially went to help him. This act of kindness turned into a tragic mistake. Ayad forced his way into the bathroom, where Thomas was trying to shield Mia. In a horrifying twist, he turned his rage on Thomas, stabbing him repeatedly. Thomas sustained at least 12 separate injuries, with the fatal blow being a stab wound to the brain. His heroic efforts to save Mia ended in his own violent death. Mia was pronounced dead at the scene, her life cut short by Ayad's senseless violence. Thomas, though gravely injured, was still alive. He was rushed to Townsville Hospital and placed on life support, but after 6 agonizing days, he succumbed to his injuries on August 30th, 2016. The tragedy shocked everyone. A Queensland coroner's report in 2020 stated that Ayad was psychotic and under the influence of cannabis during the attack. Criminal proceedings against him were dropped, as he was deemed not of sound mind. The inquest into Thomas's death revealed the full horror of the events, but also highlighted his incredible courage. Assistant Coroner Peter Siggy described Thomas's actions as great courage and valor. Thomas's family was devastated by the loss. His parents, Leslie and Sandra, spoke about the unbearable pain of losing their son. "We think about him all the time," Leslie said, his voice heavy with grief. Sandra added, "I'll never get over it. You just learn to live with it." His sister, Liv, expressed her heartbreak on Facebook, urging others to remember Thomas not as a victim, but as a friend who brought joy and kindness to the world. Thomas's bravery was honored after his death with the Queen's Gallantry Medal, one of the highest awards for acts of courage. His mother received the medal on his behalf from Prince William at Buckingham Palace. Thomas was also honored in Queensland for his heroic efforts, but even these privileges couldn't erase the reality of the loss. Thomas Jackson was gone, his life cut short by an act of senseless violence, but his courage and selflessness would never be forgotten. On May 31, 2019, in Peru's Yanachaga-Camillin National Park, 25-year-old British backpacker Elizabeth "Lizzie" Orchard set out on a trek she had planned for months. An environmental enthusiast, Lizzie was exploring South America with her sister Rachel and Rachel's boyfriend, Callum Jones. They had been hiking through the dense forests, admiring the untouched beauty of the region. Lizzie was not an ordinary traveler. Her love for the environment led her to places others might avoid. This wasn't her first solo hike, but it would be her last. That day, Lizzie, Rachel and Callum began a hike on a trail in the park. Lizzie was determined to reach a summit she believed was just 20 minutes away, promising a stunning view. Rachel and Callum, exhausted and suffering from blisters, decided to turn back. Though they were reluctant to leave Lizzie alone, she assured them she'd be fine and insisted on continuing alone. They headed back to their hostel, expecting to meet her later that evening. As the sun set, the forest around Lizzie grew darker and colder. Despite the growing darkness, Lizzie continued toward the summit. This decision would prove fatal. By the time Lizzie reached the top, night had fully set in. The stars provided little light as she began her descent. Instead of retracing her steps, Lizzie chose a different route, leading down the side of a waterfall she had seen earlier. This path was not marked. The steep, slippery terrain made every step dangerous, but Lizzie, confident in her skills, thought she could manage. As she started to climb down, her footing became uncertain. One misstep caused her to lose her balance. Lizzie tried to grab onto something but fell, plunging down the side of the waterfall. Lizzie's body tumbled down a 650-foot ravine, causing multiple fatal injuries. She landed at the bottom, her body lying still among the rocks and water. Her journey had come to a tragic end. Back at the hostel, Rachel and Callum grew worried when Lizzie didn't return. By morning, with still no sign of her, they raised the alarm. Peruvian authorities, familiar with the park's difficult terrain, launched a large search operation. Up to 50 police officers, firefighters and park rangers searched the dense forest, facing challenges from the landscape and thick canopy. For 6 days, the search continued. Lizzie's parents, Rupert and Cecilia Orchard, flew to Peru upon hearing of her disappearance, hoping for a miracle but fearing the worst. On June 6, 2019, the search team found Lizzie's body at the bottom of the Sotomayor Ravine, near a path known as Orchid Way. She was still clothed, and her injuries were consistent with a fall from a great height. The search was over, but the tragedy had just begun for her family. News of Lizzie's death spread through her hometown of Greatley, Hampshire. The small village was devastated. Lizzie had been well known for her passion for the environment and love of adventure. An inquest into Lizzie's death was held in Salisbury, Wiltshire. The coroner ruled her death an accident, noting that Lizzie had likely been trying to climb down the waterfall in the dark. The cause of death was severe injuries from a fall. Lizzie's family, present in court, expressed deep sadness at losing a beloved daughter and sister. They thanked the search teams and authorities for their efforts and asked for privacy as they grieved. It was April 2017 when a mysterious man appeared on the Appalachian Trail. He introduced himself as mostly harmless, but some hikers called him Denim because of his jeans. He carried a large backpack, a notebook filled with code, and a quiet personality. Friendly yet reserved, he intrigued those he met, but what truly set him apart was his lack of a real identity. No one knew his name, past, or what brought him to the trail. It took over 2 years and countless efforts to finally uncover who he really was. The Appalachian Trail is a 200-mile stretch of rugged terrain that attracts thousands of hikers each year. For many, it's a place of solitude and healing, filled with moments of trail magic, unexpected acts of kindness. Mostly Harmless seemed to embody this spirit. He appeared to be searching for something, perhaps peace or escape, and found it in the wilderness. But by July 2018, the man who wandered the trails would be found dead in a yellow tent in Florida's Big Cypress National Preserve. His body, undernourished and weighing just 83 pounds, was discovered by two hikers. The smell from the tent led them to the lifeless form of Mostly Harmless. He had no identification, phone or wallet, nothing to give authorities a clue about who he was. This discovery launched a complex and heartbreaking investigation. The authorities were puzzled. Here was a man with no tattoos, just an abdominal scar, and no matches in any fingerprint or DNA database. Despite the $3,500 in cash found in his tent and ample food supplies, his cause of death was undetermined. It was clear he had been living off the grid, but the reason for his death remained a mystery. What could drive a man to isolate himself so completely that not a single person came forward to claim him? As word of the unidentified hiker spread, a sketch of his face circulated on social media, drawing the interest of amateur detectives and hikers who had met him. Online communities began piecing together the story of Mostly Harmless. Some recognized him as the man they had met on the Appalachian Trail, a kind, warm, but deeply private individual. These detectives were determined to uncover his identity. Facebook groups formed, members devoted their time to solving the mystery, calling local police, combing through missing persons reports, and sharing any information they could find. Their dedication was relentless, driven by a desire to bring closure to the mystery of Mostly Harmless. In July 2020, a significant breakthrough came when members of a Facebook group raised enough money for a DNA analysis. The results pointed to southern Louisiana, leading to the discovery that Mostly Harmless was actually Vance John Rodriguez, born in 1976, near Baton Rouge. Rodriguez's story was tragic. He was a loner who struggled with mental health issues. Those who knew him described him as troubled, with a history of abusive behavior towards women and an obsession with coding. The scar on his abdomen was from a self-harm attempt at age 15, a wound that nearly claimed his life. Although he survived, the pain he carried never fully healed. In 2017, Rodriguez abandoned his life, leaving his New York City apartment, passport, wallet and credit cards behind. He decided to disappear into the wilderness. For 15 months, he wandered the Appalachian Trail, making connections but always maintaining a distance. He never revealed his true identity and never stayed long in one place. One of the most remarkable connections he made was with a hiker named Brandon Dowell. They met in Georgia and bonded over their tough childhoods and strained relationships with their fathers. But when it was time to part ways, Rodriguez refused to stay in touch. He was determined to remain anonymous. When Dowell later heard about a body found in Florida, he didn't immediately connect it to the man he met on the trail. But when photos of Mostly Harmless circulated online, he realized the kind hiker he met was the same man whose identity had baffled authorities. Identifying Vance John Rodriguez answered some questions, but raised others. How did a man who made so many connections end up dying alone and unrecognized for so long? What drove him to such extreme isolation? Why did no one from his past come forward during the 2 years his identity remained a mystery? The story of Mostly Harmless reflects how we perceive others. On the trail, Rodriguez was seen as kind and harmless, bringing warmth and friendship to those he met. But his life was far more complicated. He was burdened by his past and was ultimately unable to escape it.